Hey, good evening, everyone. So let us go ahead and let us begin with the first fact of economic growth. It says there is enormous variation in per capita income across countries. The poorest countries have per capita income less than 5% of the richest countries. So we are saying that if we go ahead and find the per capita income of economies, per capita income क्या होता है बेटा? Per capita income is GDP divided by population. So if I try to find GDP divided by population, कभी कभी हम लोग एक अलग मेजर साथ में निकाल लेते हैं, which is GDP divided by the working population. This is to understand the productivity in the economy. But this is to understand the income distribution in the economy. So if we go ahead and if we find out the GDP per capita, GDP per person, income per person in the economies, we will find that poorest countries, they have less than 5% income of the richest country. माने अगर rich country में income 100 है, तो poor country में per person income 4, 3, 2, 5 इतना होगा. Less than 5%. 5% of 100 is just 5. उससे भी कम income एक poor country का होगा. That is the enormous amount of variation in the per capita income across economies. अगर हम economies का per capita income को compare करें, we will find immense amount of variation in the per capita income. Comparison between income of different countries require them to be converted to the same currency. अब अगर मेरे को कुछ countries के income को compare करना है, if I need to compare the income of say US with India, so income will be in different currencies, beta. One is in dollar, one is in rupees. So it is required that whenever you see income in different currency, you go ahead and you convert them into the same currency. जब भी आपको इनकम अलग अलग करेंसी में दिखे तो आप उनको सेम करेंसी में कन्वर्ट करो. In order to convert them in the same currency, we can either use market exchange rate or we can use purchasing power parity. इन दोनों में से हम कुछ भी use कर सकते हैं. It is suggested to use purchasing power parity for better results. I have already discussed this in the video lecture of one of the development economics already. मैं इसको discuss कर चुकी हूँ. Why purchasing power parity is better. So just do it from there. I've already discussed this. So purchasing power parity को use करना is much better than the market exchange rate. ठीक है. Now, as I told you, there are two kind of comparisons which are possible. दो तरीके के हम comparisons कर सकते हैं. The first one is GDP divided by population. तो population में you will have dependent population also. माने you will have children also, old age people also, non-working population also. Whereas GDP divided by the labor force basically goes ahead and tells you the exact GDP per working population. माने for example, just take this example. So suppose, but there is a family. In this family, mother, father, two children, child 1, child 2, and grandfather, grandmother. 6 people are living. Only mother and father are earning. Okay. Their income is total 60,000. So if I divide this by 6, that means 10,000 per head. 10,000 per head income आता है. But if I divide this by the working population, माने 30,000 per person they would be earning. So dividing by the working population tells me per person earning in a way. But dividing by the population tells me per head consumption in a way. कि कितना एक इंसान उसमें से कंज्यूम कर पाएगा, व्हाट कुड बी द पर हेड कंजम्पशन, इज दैट मेकिंग सेंस? तो यही यहाँ पर है, वी कैन ईदर डिवाइड बाय पॉपुलेशन और लेबर फोर्स. Even when countries can have similar GDP per capita, they can have very different GDP per labor force, of course. जैसे अगर मैं एक और फैमिली को यहाँ पे कंपेयर करूं, हाँ, यहाँ पे मदर, फादर, अगेन 2 चिल्ड्रन एंड ग्रैंडफादर, ग्रैंडमदर, ये सेम ही है. बट हियर ओनली फादर इज अर्निंग, बट फादर इज अर्निंग 60,000. तो डिवाइडेड बाय 6 मतलब जीडीपी पर कैपिटा इनकम पर पर्सन तो 10,000 ही पड़ेगा अभी भी, इट विल बी 10,000 ओनली. बट इनकम डिवाइडेड बाय वर्क फोर्स ये अलग हो जाएगा. यहाँ पे फादर अपने आप में शोज दैट ही इज वेरी प्रोडक्टिव, ही इज अर्निंग 60,000. यहाँ पे मदर एंड फादर दे आर लो प्रोडक्टिव, ईच ऑफ देम इज ओनली अर्निंग 30,000, right? So even though they can have same GDP per capita, their GDP per worker can be different, right? ये यहाँ पे हमने ये लिखा है, right बेटा? दो GDP per capita tells us about general welfare level. तो यहाँ पे दोनों ही जगह से हमें पता चलता है कि अच्छा पर पर्सन 10,000 रुपए खर्च करने के लिए है, right? So it is telling us about the general welfare level. GDP per worker tells us about the productivity of the labor. पर वर्कर बताता है कि लेबर कितना प्रोडक्टिव है. There will be people not officially counted as being in labor force who may be engaged in home production, underground activities and so on. Of course, ये हर economy में होता है. That population में everyone will come. But labor force में we are eliminating the people who are doing, home production या जो illegal activities में. उनका पैसा ही कहीं पे काउंट नहीं हो रहा है, बट वो पॉपुलेशन में आ रहे हैं, right? Thereby they are changing GDP per person. जैसे for example, let's say that this family grandfather, he is actually involved in some illegal activity और उनके पास अपना 20-30,000 है, but that will not be shown anywhere. हाँ, तो it will, ये कम दिखेगा GDP per capita, but actually वो ज्यादा होना चाहिए because this person is in illegal activity. Yeah, maybe he is growing something of his own, है ना? तो basically due to these illegal activities, due to home production, these numbers can also differ. Effort is defined as labor force participation rate. The more effort an economy puts into producing output, the more output is produced. तो ये assume किया जाता है that output is an increasing function of employment. जैसे जैसे the number of people employed will increase, output in the economy will increase. The number of people employed can be called as effort of the economy. So more the effort in the economy, जितना ज्यादा लोग employed होंगे काम करने में, output produce करने में, the more the effort of the economy, the more the output that will be produced in the economy. उतना ही ज्यादा output economy में produce होगा. Okay. Now let's look at some of the examples of disparity in income. और ये एग्जाम्पल बताने के लिए what I have done is I am comparing two people. One person lives in Uganda and one person lives in US. To earn the same money that US person earns in a day, जितना पैसा एक US का इंसान एक दिन में कमाता है, वो पैसा कमाने के लिए to earn the same money, a person living in Uganda must go ahead and work for 1.5 months. 1.5 month के लिए काम करना पड़ेगा उतना ही पैसा कमाने के लिए जितना एक इंसान जो यूएस में काम करता है वो एक दिन में कमाता है. सो टू अर्न द सेम इनकम एज द पर्सन लिविंग इन यूएस, look at the disparity of income. The person living in Uganda has to work for 1.5 months. Similarly, the person living in Uganda has 20 times more infant mortality rate as that in US. Similarly, his life expectancy is 2/3 that of US. So if suppose US में someone lives for 90 years, Uganda में he will only live in for 60 years. It is 2/3 than that of US. तो ये सब disparity बता रहा है that the income in Uganda is low, the infant mortality rate in Uganda is high, the life expectancy in Uganda is low. ठीक है. Now this is a table beta. I have just tried to take some numbers to help you explain something. यहाँ पे देख लो एक बार जरा. We are talking about the four main kind of countries: rich countries, poor countries, growth miracles, जिनका growth rate have been very high over the years, and growth disaster who have negative or very low growth rate. ठीक है. Now try to compare the GDP per capita of a rich and a poor country. So I'm comparing GDP per capita of US and China. And see the difference, $43,000 versus only $6,400. उसी तरीके से अगर हम जीडीपी पर वर्कर को भी कंपेयर करें, $84,000 versus $10,000. Right? So you will see that the GDP per capita of rich and poor are very varied. बहुत ज्यादा disparity है दोनों के बीच में. Similarly, if we go ahead and if we look at the growth miracle country like Hong Kong, right, Malaysia, तो आप देखोगे कि their GDP per capita and per worker is very close and sometimes even more than the rich countries. तो बहुत सारी रिच कंट्रीज से बहुत ज्यादा है और बहुत सारी रिच कंट्रीज के बहुत क्लोज है इन ग्रोथ मिरेकल कंट्रीज का जीडीपी पर कैपिटा, where are these disaster countries they are doing very badly, right? ठीक है. So how do we define the growth rate beta? The growth rate of GDP is nothing but the GDP of current year minus past year upon past year into 100. तो अगर मुझे सपोज ग्रोथ रेट, जैसे यहाँ पे हियर इट इज रिटन ना ग्रोथ रेट, सो इफ आई नीड टू फाइंड ग्रोथ रेट ऑफ द जीडीपी, तो कैसे निकला होगा? ग्रोथ रेट ऑफ जीडीपी विल बी जीडीपी 2008 minus GDP 2007 upon GDP 2007 into 100. This would have given us the growth rate of GDP in US. ऐसे जीडीपी इज ग्रोइंग एट 5.6% इन चाइना 2008 में एंड 1.6% इन यूएस. ग्रोथ मिरेकल कंट्रीज में 4.3%. एंड ये देखो ग्रोथ डिजास्टर में देयर इज नेगेटिव ग्रोथ रेट, तो इट वाज माइनस 0.4%. ठीक है. क्यूमुलेटिव डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ वर्ल्ड पॉपुलेशन बाय जीडीपी पर वर्कर 2008. तो क्या देखा गया? I will just summarize this thing. What was seen that if I take approximately 66.67, that means approximately 2/3 of the world population अगर हम ले लें, their GDP per worker is in the first 20%. It is up to 20%. 20% मतलब 1/5 of the GDP of US. तो अगर US का GDP per worker 100 है, तो इनका जीडीपी पर वर्कर 20 या 20 से बिलो होगा. हाउ मेनी सच कंट्रीज, हाउ मेनी सच पॉपुलेशन? 2/3 पॉपुलेशन ऑफ द वर्ल्ड. तो अगर वर्ल्ड में देर आर सपोज इन 1000 पीपल, हाँ, तो 2/3 मीन्स 667 लोगों का जो पर पर्सन इनकम है वो यूएस के कंपैरिजन में 1/5 या उससे कम है. आर यू गेटिंग इट? सो दिस इज द अमाउंट ऑफ डिस्पैरिटी इन द इकोनॉमी. Right? So try to see this number. ये हो गया 20. This is 20 GDP per worker relative to US, and this becomes the percentage of the world population. So 66% of the world population is below 1/5 of the GDP per worker as compared to US. Okay. So this is exactly what is written here. 2/3 of world population lived in countries with less than 20% of US GDP per worker. Bulk of population lives in only 2 countries. अब ये जो 2/3 population है, इसका major population was only in India and China, right? Okay, now just see this thing. This says world population by GDP per worker. बेटा, it is very important कि आप ऐसे graphs को थोड़ा याद रखो from exam point of view. Even I have made this graph ना. Why it is important to remember these graphs? एक idea लगता है about the kind of statement that can come in exam. तो यहाँ पे हम क्या दिखा रहे हैं? देखो, I am comparing 1960 with 2008, and what do I see? कि तो थोड़ा disparity कम होता हुआ दिख रहा है. Why? Because earlier more than 60% of the people, 60 से ऊपर आ रहा है ना, so more than 60% of the people, they had their income between 0 to 10% of यूएस इनकम। तो माने इफ आई गो अहेड एंड आई फाइंड, जैसे फिर से एग्जांपल के लिए यूएस इनकम इज 100, तो 60% से ऊपर ऐसे लोग थे whose income was 10 or below, whose income was up to 10% of यूएस इनकम। तो जितना भी यूएस का इनकम का था उसका सिर्फ 10% इनकम था कितने वर्ल्ड का पॉपुलेशन में, इट अकाउंटेड फॉर मोर देन 60% ऑफ वर्ल्ड पॉपुलेशन। बट व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट 2008 बेटा, when we talk about 2008, this has drastically fallen. Are you understanding it? It has drastically fallen. समझे? तो अब only less than 10% of people have their income between as less than, let me rewrite it. It will be थोड़ा आराम से लिखती हूँ एक बारी. So this is 10 to 20, हाँ. तो अब देखो इन 1960 का अगर मैं बात करूं, so more than 60% of world population, their income was in 0 to 10% of GDP of US bracket. ठीक है. अब अगर मैं 2008 की बात करूं, that means this one 2008 represented by orange, तो ये हो गया between 40 to 50, between 40 to 50% of people have their income as less than 10% of US income. समझ रहे हो? तो मतलब थोड़ा पॉवर्टी तो कम हुआ, थोड़ा डिस्पैरिटी तो कम हुआ. तो इट्स लाइक दिस, जहां पे पहले out of 1,000 people 600 people had their income as $10 or less when US का income was $100, तो अब 40 to 50 people, 400 to 500 people, sorry, उनका इनकम $10 और लेस होगा when US का इनकम is $100. So earlier out of 1,000 people 600 or more people उनका इनकम इतना कम था. अब 400 to 500 लोगों का इनकम is this much. So some people, मतलब some people जिनका इनकम लेस था, they have gone to a higher income level, more income level. Are you getting it? Their income have increased, तो disparity has fallen over time. ऐसे अब हम बात करते हैं नेक्स्ट इनकम सेट का. नाउ थिंक अबाउट 10 to 20%. सो इन 10 to 20% हम कह रहे हैं दैट लेस देन 10% ऑफ वर्ल्ड पॉपुलेशन, उनका इनकम यूएस के इनकम के 10 to 20% में आ रहा था. एंड नाउ दिस इज 20 to 30% ऑफ पीपल. माने मोर पीपल नाउ हैव the income in 10 to 20% of GDP of US का ब्रैकेट है ना. तो ऐसा कुछ, जैसे अगर मैं कहूं कि पहले there were only suppose 50 people who had their income between 10 to $20 जब यूएस का इनकम $100 था, 10 to 20% में 50 लोग आते थे. So now we are saying that instead of 50 people we have approximately 20 to 50 people जिनका इनकम 10 to 20 वाले ब्रैकेट में है व्हेन यूएस का इनकम 100 है. सो वो लोग जो पहले यहां लाई कर रहे होंगे जिनका इनकम 10 से भी कम रहा होगा, they would have definitely jumped to this level whose income would have become between 10 to 20. So in a way slowly the income of other people are increasing, the disparity is falling. समझ रहे हो बात को? This is what is written here. Take this example. So China has most of the world population, China and India. So we are saying that in 1960, same data I'm talking about, China's income was 2% of US GDP. माने वो पक्का इस ब्रैकेट में रहा होगा 0 to 10 वाले में. And then in 2008 it became 13% of US GDP. माने it would have come in this bracket, right? So slowly the disparity fell. Disparity कम हो गई between US and China. So substantial decrease in world population with income 0 to 10%. जिन लोगों का भी income US के comparison में only 0 to 10% था, they started falling. and there was increase in share of world population with income 10 to 20%. Mane, they are going closer towards the income of US, right? In India, GDP per worker less than 5% of US in 1960, more than 9% in 2008. So of course, India abhi bhi idhar hi tha. Till 2008 also it was here only. But in 1960, its income was about 5% of US income. And in 2008, about 9% of US income, right? Growth miracles. Now, there were some countries which were called as growth miracle countries. Growth miracle countries ने एकदम से बहुत heavy, बहुत high growth दिखाना शुरू कर दिया. They started showing extremely well growth. Some countries were Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, etc. And we saw that, for example, Hong Kong ka I have shown you in the table also. Hong Kong had per capita GDP of 37,834, which was more than a lot of industrialized countries. So this is one example, beta, that in 1960, Singapore had 28% of the per capita GDP as compared to US. But in 2008, per capita GDP of Singapore was more than US. US को ही exceed कर दिया. So 1960 में it had 28% of US GDP, but 2008 में its GDP exceeded US more than the GDP of US. So these came to be known as the growth miracle countries. Right? So that's the fact number one. Fact one क्या बोलता है? That there is immense disparity among the GDP of the different countries. Okay, beta. Thank you.